Okay, welcome everybody. Across the country, conversations about data centers have generated a lot of debate. These centers can bring opportunities for private investment, and they can bring construction opportunities. They also raise questions about water usage, electricity usage, persistent noise, and even strain on existing public infrastructure. So residents are asking reasonable questions. Where can these things be built? How much electricity and water will be consumed? How will these impact my current utility rates, which are on the rise? And how many permanent jobs will they actually create? With nearby schools and homes, businesses, will they all be protected? And these concerns are legitimate. And of course, in St. Louis County, we take them very seriously. So our goal is to establish clear rules on the development of data centers before we have a proposal in front of us for approval. But zoning is only part of our responsibility. We're also responsible to protect the health and the welfare of St. Louis County residents. And that's why I believe that the Department of Public Health must be involved early on in the planning and the approval of these proposals from the very beginning, not after they've been established and we have complaints or issues. And that's why I have Planning Director Jacob Trimble here with us today, and also Dr. Kanika Cunningham, the Director of the Department of Public Health. Jacob will tell us a little bit about the process for the past few months that the Planning Department has been reviewing proposals for regulations around data centers. And Dr. Cunningham will talk about the importance of the health department in maintaining clean water, air quality, and monitoring noise pollution in St. Louis County. Jacob.
Thank you, Dr. Page. So in April of 2026, the Planning Commission began a formal review of the county's data center regulations, which were non-existent at the time. An initial public hearing was held this past May, and county staff has then convened 3 meetings with an advisory working group that includes utility providers, construction trades, data center representatives, environmental organizations, technical experts, and county departments. On August 10th, the Planning Commission held another public hearing to review the results of the staff recommendations. The proposed framework recognizes that not every data center is the same. A small 5,000 square foot facility should not be regulated in the same way that a large 50 megawatt, 100,000 square foot facility should be. The draft therefore establishes 4 categories: micro, small, standard, and major, with requirements increasing as a facility sizes, its power demands, and its potential and community impacts also increase. The largest facilities would be restricted to industrial districts and would require a conditional use permit or a planned district procedure, a rezoning process. That means that there would be public notice. That means that there would be a public commission hearing. That means review by the county council. And it means the county can evaluate the location and conditions for every major project that could be approved in the future. The draft also proposes setbacks from homes, schools, and parks, landscaping and screening, lighting requirements, architectural standards, and noise studies. These protections become stronger as the sizes of the facilities increase. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Cunningham.
Thank you all so much. So as a physician and the director of St. Louis County Department of Public Health, my responsibility is to ask a simple but critically important question. What does this mean for the health and well-being of the people of St. Louis County? As we consider data centers, we have to consider the potential impact on our water supply, our environment, and the quality of life our surrounding communities will have. That is why public health needs to be involved well before construction begins. There are 3 areas I want to highlight for you today. First is water. Clean, reliable water is not simply an infrastructure issue, it's a public health obligation. Large data centers can require significant amounts of water for cooling. Before a major facility is approved, we need clear answers, such as how much water will it use? Where will the water come from? Do we have sufficient capacity to meet the demand, particularly during extreme heats? We should establish baseline information before a facility is built and require transparent reporting once it begins. Number 2, air quality and energy. Data centers require substantial amounts of electricity. That demand can place pressure on the electric grid, and depending on how that electricity is generated, can contribute to air pollution. As a physician, I know that air pollution is not just an environmental concern. It is a health concern, as air pollution can worsen asthma and other respiratory conditions and contribute to cardiovascular disease and other serious health outcomes. So we need to understand not only how much energy a facility will require, but also the potential health and environmental consequences that meeting that demand will take. Third is noise. So data centers operate 24 hours a day. Cooling systems, fans, and generators can create persistent noise and vibration. Some of that noise is low frequency, and traditional noise measurements may not fully capture what residents experience. We need to know what the environment was like before construction and whether it changes once the facility is operating. That is what public health does. We prevent problems before they become emergencies. Before a major data center is approved, we need meaningful public health review, reliable baseline data, clear water and energy assessments, appropriate noise monitoring, and transparent reporting. Most importantly, public health must be a part of the planning process from day one. We plan before we build, we measure before we assume, and we prevent before we respond. We can support innovation and economic development while protecting the health and well-being of St. Louis County. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. So here's what I'm proposing. I'm asking the Department of Planning, Department of Public Health to work cooperatively with the Department of Transportation and Public Works, the Metropolitan Sewer District, and our state regulators to develop a coordinated public health focused plan to be involved before these large data centers are approved. We need to prevent problems before they happen instead of asking our neighborhoods to live with the consequences of poor planning. The burden should be on the developer to demonstrate that they have a project that can operate responsibly. It should not be on the residents to live with whatever happens. So the same principle applies to any potential economic promises associated with the new data center project. If a company requests public incentives, and the public should receive a clear and enforceable return for those incentives. So that return could include local workers involved in the project, apprenticeship programs, infrastructure investment, energy efficient support for residents and small businesses, environmental restoration, or improvement in broadband access or digital literacy. This is not just about choosing between technology and a neighborhood. This is making sure that the technology strengthens our neighborhood and advances them. So we're going to be establishing clear expectations from folks that are bringing these proposals. Will be protected. These recommendations are not final. No ordinance has been adopted. Written comments are still being actively solicited by the Department of Planning. They'll be accepted through the end of August, and we ask you to reach out to data center comments at stlewiscountymo.gov. And all of your comments will be part of the official record. County staff will present these comments informally to the Department of Planning and to the Planning Commission at its October meeting. The Commission will subsequently draft proposal for possible consideration by the County Council to codify any new recommendations into an ordinance. The County Council holds the legislative authority for ordinances around zoning, and they accept recommendations from the Planning Department and Planning and Zoning Commission. This means you still have time to participate in the conversation. You can email us at our comment address, or you can contact a member of the County Council and let them know what you think the community benefits should be, where you think these facilities should or should not be allowed. So submit your comments to our email, comment line, or contact your member of the County Council. Tell us what protections you would like to see for your family and for your neighborhoods. Tell us what information you believe the companies would have to disclose when they bring these proposals forward. Tell us what a responsible project would actually look like. The data center policy, again, is not set in stone. The decisions we make in St. Louis County will be informed by the residents who participate in the process. So today we're asking for your engagement. We want to hear your comments and concerns. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
What's your approach to working with the county council on this? They haven't been defending this to you recently.
Well, when the county council disagrees with my administration, it's big news. But many other topics, we work together and we get them done, and it doesn't make the news. I think you'll find that data centers is one of those big ideas. It's a big deal, and we need to get our hands around it. It's a responsibility of the government to get it done, regardless of personalities or any other drama that we see from time to time in government.
You mentioned the strain on the grid that these data centers can have. Your planning draft says that the local government or zoning cannot possibly require renewable energy. But the city, they're voting on the zoning code Friday to require it, with financial penalties attached if they don't build out enough renewable to power their own data centers. So is your staff's legal analysis wrong, or is the city about to pass something they can't enforce? Which is
Well, that's a level of detail that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know if it's a legal question or a policy decision. The policy questions are still under development. We're still accepting comments, but I'll let Jacob try and respond to that question about renewable energy.
Sure. So the Department of Planning here at the county, we've been looking at other jurisdictions that have been requiring renewable energy credits or the use of renewable energies on site at data centers. We're continuing to look into that, the limitations of what zoning can require versus what other ordinances in county code can require.
you use the word representatives, data center representatives, with the workshop plural. Beyond Heather Coyle, which data center operators or developers were seeking input on this process?
So in our staff advisory committee, we had Heather Coyle, who was formerly of the Data Center Coalition. She's the only individual that was that specifically represented the data center in that conversation.
No other outreach from operators or developers at all?
Not at this time.
Hey, switching gears for a second, have you had any conversations with council members about rolling up property taxes because the deadline to do so is soon out?
I'll take other issues if there are no other questions about data centers.
Oh, sure. With the data center regulations, you obviously can only regulate the unincorporated parts of the county. Are you talking with the municipalities to see if they would implement similar regulations at their level?
Well, frequently in St. Louis County, municipalities will follow county on codes and sometimes other policies. I would imagine that other municipalities will be very interested in our process and will use them as a guideline, but they certainly have the right to deviate by the authority of the municipality.
Have you had any talks with them about this in particular yet?
No, we are not coordinating with any municipalities at all about data center policy. I don't know if they've been involved in this feedback in this process. We're really starting at the ground up to build best practices and review with all the stakeholders, and we have the luxury of not having a project in front of us, which makes this a much different conversation.
But this whole fight over regulation is really about determining which data centers are hyperscale or which ones are in the big category. That big category draws the heaviest scrutiny from the public under your process. Your initial draft said 25 megawatts was a big one. Then you sat down with people from Ameren or American Water, and it doubled, well past the city's 30 megawatts up to 50. Can you point to anything in this process where the line moved in favor of the public and not the entities or operators that are building these things?
Well, I'll defer to Jacob, but I do want to emphasize as we get down into the details of the proposed or the draft policy, this is all subject to public comment and more review. We got a long ways to go. This is where we're starting, but Jacob may have some insight on that.
I just kind of want to echo what Dr. Page said, which is that at this point, we are still refining the proposals. So the original draft was based on staff research. We continue to do deeper dive and deeper research into all of the regulatory entities and all the rules that data centers will be subject to, and we continue to review the appropriate thresholds for those facilities.
With an eye on pricing these things out of this region or attracting them to build here?
So for St. Louis County's perspective is that we are looking to create a situation in which we protect residents, but the door's not closed to the right investments from outsiders. And I would
No,
defer to
I
Dr.
think
Fitch.
that's right. I mean, a lot of this is going to happen in next administration, but as a primary goal, I mean, we look to protect the health and welfare of our residents in St. Louis County. That's why we have the Department of Public Health deeply involved in these questions about water and clean air and noise pollution. So we have professionals answering these questions who have experience in this space. But, you know, we want to protect the residents of St. Louis County, but we're not going to create a process where we already have data centers in St. Louis County. They're all over the place. We don't have any large ones, and we'll have a conversation about whether or not we might have a place for them someday.
Putting your plan side by side with the city's, your current proposal is far more favorable to developers. But I also heard you call on state regulators to weigh in here. Do you enjoy the ability to compete with the city and draw a data center here, or did I hear you suggest that the state should have a one-size-fits-all approach across the state for these things?
Mark, as is consistent, your question has a lot of questions in it and a couple of statements. I can't compare our policy to the city's policy because I haven't looked at the city's policy. If your assertion is that ours is more open, then perhaps that's where we're starting. Maybe Jacob has something to say about that, but our primary goal here, and I want to say it again, we don't have a proposal in front of us. We want to protect the residents of St. Louis County. We take seriously clean air, clean water, and noise pollution, and that will be part of this process. And then we'll find a way to be, just like any development question, be fair to the property owners and make sure that their concerns to develop a property doesn't negatively impact the neighboring residents and the rest of the community. That's our goal. Do you want to say anything else about that?
I think that covers it.
Do you mind going back to my question, switching gears here for a second? Have you had any conversations with council members about rolling up property taxes because the deadline to do so
Right.
has come up?
I will answer your question about property taxes as long as we're sure we're done with data centers. I don't want to bounce around too much. Does anybody have any other? I'm glad to talk about that. Glad to talk about any other issue you want to talk about. We always go off to other topics. Does anybody have any other data center questions? No, it's all right. We're here today.
I don't need, just one more if I can, just on the, I believe that your proposal requires these developers to suggest in their application whether or not they would seek any tax benefit. What does that have to do with zoning? And couldn't the developer just get the zoning approval first and then seek tax incentive later?
That's a process question. You know, talk about how that works.
So the recommendation is that any developer that would submit an application for a standard or major data center in unincorporated St. Louis County would be required to submit a pre-development application, and that would cover a whole host of topics and issues, some of which would be economic development issues, for them to walk through their impact on water, electricity, economic development. And so as part of the application process, that would be required prior to going to the Planning Commission and prior to review.
But why require that question to be answered when you wouldn't ask a target, for example, to say, do you intend to seek tax breaks?
So for this case, because data centers extract, or they sort of have unique impacts on the community with the amount of impact that they can have with noise, with electricity usage. We are looking at all the ways that we can be protecting our residents and answering every single appropriate question before permits are ever issued.
So will the answer to that question factor into their approval?
So yes, whatever application that they submit with all the information that is provided will be evaluated by the Planning Commission and ultimately by the County Council should a development ever come before unincorporated St. Louis County.
Okay, before we move on to potpourri, is there any other questions about the data center? Or the data center regulations, I should say. There is no data center to talk about. Okay, go.
Do you want one?
You know, it's like any other development. If we can have new development in St. Louis County that brings economic growth, protects the residents in the community. We already have data centers. We have lots of data centers of different sizes. Whether we have a large-scale data center, I don't know if there's a good place for it, and we can work out any concerns of neighboring residents, and they can bring their own electricity or not drain the grid. It doesn't impact other people's electricity. The water consumption is reasonable. The noise pollution is insignificant. Then there's probably a path. But St. Louis County has to protect the health and welfare of its residents. So I don't know, a hypothetical data center, we have to see the proposal and decide whether or not it fits. And that's why we're trying to develop these regulations outside of a specific proposal. And I think it's a very thoughtful thing for our planning department and our Department of Public Health to do. Okay, property taxes. There has been some conversations, with the county council. We are very concerned about the ability to keep our commitments with the collective bargaining agreements with our employees, especially our police officers. I did hear Councilman Harder's comment at the last meeting, and you all can ask him for clarification if you want, but he did say that we negotiated sweetheart deals with our collective bargaining agreements. I don't think our police officers are paid too much. I don't think our other employees in transportation, public works, or health are paid too much. I think we have to be responsible in our salaries for our employees, and especially sensitive to the salaries of our police officers because they have to compete with other policing jurisdictions. We need to find the money to cover this shortfall. The council did defund the police budget in December of 2025. It's very clear there was a vote, took money out of the police budget, and now we don't have enough money in the budget to pay for our police officers' salaries. I do think there's some interest in the county council to put that money back and to make sure that our police officers know we'll pay for it. We'll pay for their salaries this year, and we will honor their collective bargaining agreements. The question now is, what do you do next year? Because Councilman Harder has said not one more dollar. Well, not one more dollar means no raises, which means we're not going to be able to fulfill our collective bargaining agreements with our police officers and with our other county employees. That's a problem, but the council does have the authority to disrupt those collective bargaining agreements because they're subject to appropriations. And if they don't appropriate the funds, then we'll have an impasse with our employees. We do have the money. The money's in the NFL settlement fund, and we can bridge our salaries with our employees for a couple of more years. And then we have to figure out where we get sustaining revenue. The use tax did not pass, and it doesn't appear to be the right political environment for that. That leaves us with one possible ongoing revenue source. It's the same thing that every other taxing jurisdiction does in the region, and that's a property tax. Nobody's excited about increasing property taxes in St. Louis County. We are glad that there is some statutory relief in St. Louis County for seniors, and they're protected. But if we have to choose between salaries for our police officers and funding public safety and the property tax, that's a very tough decision that the council is going to have to make. And you're right, they need to make it by the end of September.
What if it's a false choice? What if you seem to be the one circling the police line item in the budget? There are thousands of line items in the budget. Why is that the one you're seeing on that?
Well, Mark, I know you've looked at our budget because you're pretty thorough, and the police budget is the biggest part of our budget. And if we did a 10% reduction across our budget, we'd still get 190 police officers, 10% across all budget line items. So we either keep our collective bargaining agreements and we pay people. Most of our budget is public safety, and most of that, 85% of that is police officer salary. So I appreciate the narrative that somehow I've magically focused on the police department. It's because that's where the money is. That's where the cost is. The cost is in public safety. The cost is in the police department. And we've made a commitment in St. Louis County. We value our public safety. We made a commitment to our police officers, and we need to keep that.
Just for clarification, your $3.5 million number, is that based on full staffing levels, or does that account for current staffing levels? Like you have 190 vacancies?
So the $3.5 million that I've requested from the county council is to pay the current police officers that we have through the end of the year. It doesn't pay for any new police officers. I expect that we'll be talking about more supplemental appropriations for the police department before the end of the year. If they hire anybody else, or if there's more police overtime, if there's any sort of unrest or any sort of activity that requires more police overtime, then we're going to need more money to pay for that.
What's your reaction to the new Boeing contract for the F-15
So the Boeing F-15 contract, it's a sign of the times in the world. I mean, we're at war, and it doesn't look like there's any end in sight, and people in our community are feeling that, and we're feeling the impact of that. The work of Boeing is good for our community because there's a lot of people who work at Boeing, and Boeing's a large employer. So we're happy to see Boeing's success, and we're happy to see the work coming to St. Louis. It's also a sign of the times in our world, so that the world needs more of Boeing's product.
Do you have any details about how many jobs it might bring or any effect that it might have on current production?
No, the job impact, you'll have to ask the Boeing folks on that, and I'm sure they'll have some numbers for you, but I haven't heard anything. It's a relatively recent announcement.
Dr. Cunningham, with the Cyclospora outbreak, any update you can share, or is it safe to eat salad yet?
Yes, it is. So my department, we actually, when we received the notification of the bags of lettuce with the recall, we actually went and removed all of the contaminated bags from St. Louis County. So we are continuing to monitor right now. I will say it is safe to eat salad in St. Louis County for now. If there's any changes, we'll definitely put out a health alert or we'll notify the community. I think the other thing I want to add is that, a lot of people see a lot of food recalls. I do want to reassure people as the health department that we are keeping up and monitoring it with the eggs. And I think the other one was with beef, I believe it was. So we're monitoring it, and we will continue to communicate and want people to be reassured that we are doing what we need to do to make sure you can eat safely in St. Louis County.
Is there, from your experience, does there feel like there's an uptick in the amount of foods that are recalled or health alerts issued?
Yeah, I do think so. I think this goes back to some of the changes at the federal level with the cuts with the CDC, the FDA. We're feeling it right now. I mean, they were our regulators of food, and so now we're seeing more recalls, and I do think it's a directly impact from the federal administration. So we have to deal with what we are dealt, and I think as a public health department, we'll continue to follow this closely and to alert St. Louis County and remove whatever contaminated bags that we need to remove.
Are you seeing less lettuce cases or
Yeah, I don't have the number of cases. We can get that later. I was prepared for data centers. We'll get the number of cases, but we're also seeing an uptick in salmonella and other GI illnesses. I think it's because people are, going to the hospital or the urgent cares thinking they have Cyclospora, and no, it's a different pathogen. And so we are seeing an uptick in other GI illnesses across St. Louis County. Elizabeth, we can share, we put out a report with GI illnesses on a monthly basis, so we can share that information with you, the data.
Dr. Page, what's your reaction to the death of Dolly Parton?
Well, it's a legend in our country, and she will be missed, and her impact will continue for sure. Dolly Parton's death is what we're talking about, if you didn't have a question.
Favorite Dolly Parton song?
What's that?
Favorite Dolly Parton
No,
song?
we're not going to do that.
I have another military question.
Yes.
Do you have any insight into when the Navy might announce its decision on jet contract?
I do not. I have no insight in the Navy's jet contract. I would say that Boeing is well positioned to compete for all military aircraft. They've got a good product, and they do good work, and we're proud to have them here. I would like to see less war in our country, but we're lucky to have that kind of technology here in St. Louis.
On politics, the Democratic Party has nominated its candidate for your replacement. What level of involvement do you expect to take in that race in November? And what might a transition look like from your point of view?
The question is about the race for county executive, and we won't do a lot of politics here, but I'll just say I'm supporting the Democratic ticket. I'll support the Democratic nominee for county executive and everybody running in St. Louis County.
Is there an open line between you and Jake between now and?
I talk to everybody. So those conversations aren't always relayed publicly. I think we get more done in one-on-one conversations. But I've talked to Jake Zimmerman, who will be the Democratic nominee, and I think he'll be ready.
Anybody?
Okay, thank you.